And welcome back to Music Free Static. I hope you're having a fabulous day. And I gotta tell you, I used to love social media, quote unquote social media, right? I got onto Twitter back in my political activist phase. This is like 2008. And it was great because I was able to connect with a lot of great people. And it was it was great because I could see that I was not alone in my beliefs, okay? Which was awesome. And that's where all the action was happening. If there was news happening anywhere in the world, it would hit Twitter first. Like, remember the the plane that crashed in the Hudson or did an emergency landing in the Hudson? Yeah, they did a movie about it. Starred Tom Hanks. I'm sure it was fine. But yeah, there were people on the banks of the river who filmed that plane as it came in, and that was all on Twitter immediately, right? That was amazing. But what was social has morphed into something else. Okay, it's not social media anymore. It's really creator media because all of the social stuff has gone. Okay. Oh yes, on Blue Sky and on X, you can talk to each other, but neither of those platforms are really built for it. X in particular is not built for discourse. Okay. And that has to do with the character limits and all that type of thing. Okay. But the reality is too, none of those platforms, whether it's X or Instagram or TikTok or even Blue Sky to some extent, are about being social. Okay. They're about interaction and engagement. I would actually argue that Blue Sky, even though it doesn't have an algorithmic feed, though I think they're adding one, a discovery feed, so you can do all this fun stuff. It's still about interaction and engagement. And the reality is, I think it always has been, not just Blue Sky, but X and Twitter for it, because it was all about the likes, right? The likes and the retweets and the shares and all of that stuff, right? And the posts with the hottest takes blew up. And that's just the way it is now, right? The hotter the take, the the further it goes, right? Now, Nostr, which I also love as a technology, is almost worse in some ways because not only do you get the fun issues of likes and shares and things like that, but they have zaps, okay, which they refer to. It's a direct monetary reward. It uses Bitcoin, but it's you basically transfer one sat, which is the smallest fraction of a Bitcoin. Okay, and so you can transfer as many sats to that person you like. In a lot of ways, it's not unlike doing bits on Twitch or something like that. Other than the fact there's no corporate overlord skimming their take off the top. Okay, it's just a direct monetary reward for the hottest takes, right? The more excitement and engagement you can get, right? Right, the more you can, you know, pwn the libs or pwn the cons or however you want to put it, right? The more you can dunk on somebody, the more likes and shares and all of that stuff and in Noster's case zaps, the more of that you can get, right? And the problem with all of that is that magnifies the extremes, right? Because it's the hottest takes that get the shares, right? Having a reasoned opinion about something is not getting it's just not getting that type of blow up very often. Because more often than not, it's the hey, they said something that was really awesome, I'm going to share this because oh man, they really dunked on that guy, right? And that's what ends up happening. And so it's not enough that you dislike something, okay? It now has to be the worst thing ever because that's what brings in the likes and the shares and the subs, right? It's the, you know, this character ruined Star Wars, right? You know, this football player is the worst thing that's ever happened to the league, right? It's all of those types of things because that's what brings in all of that engagement. And on a lot of those platforms, engagement also brings money, right? Whether it may not be direct cash on the platform, but it may come in the form of, hey, now you've got enough of a following that you can bring in sponsorships and things like that. Or you can translate that following into something else, okay? And you see that with Instagram, TikTok. Yeah, TikTok does have a creator rewards program. You have to be the top 1% of 1%, probably of 1% to make anything reasonable on TikTok. But the more you can get those people in, right? Now I can get, like, I can say I've got so many people who see my posts every day. Now I can get a deal and I can sell merch, I could sell shoes, I could sell VPNs, right? Right, you know, all that fun stuff. Whatever it is you want to do. You know, and honestly, if you are in need of a VPN, Proton VPN is very awesome, and you should check them out. There's a link in the description. Okay, yes. So I did have to slide that in there, but that's really what it's about. Is the more you can get those people into your creator feed, the more you can do stuff like that, right? And get all of that ancillary income. But it's all about having those hottest of takes. And it gets even worse when you start dealing with politics, right? Because it's not enough that you disagree with somebody on policy. It's that the other side is going to destroy the country and democracy and kill puppies and force everyone to have pineapple on their pizza or something stupid like that, right? It's just, everything becomes an existential crisis, right? As I said, politics is the worst about this. And what's even worse about politics is it bleeds into everything else, right? It's not enough to disagree on tax policy or something, okay? But now if politician X says they like AI, for example, now it's like all of their political opponents now have to say that AI is the worst thing ever because politician X likes it. Because obviously politician X is wrong about everything, everywhere, all at once. And therefore their views on AI are also obviously wrong, and therefore we have to hate it. And then, of course, along the same lines, those people who support politician X now have to be all in on AI because, you've got to support your team. You got to jump on the bandwagon because that's what politician X is doing, right? And it just magnifies all. And now you get, of course, all of the heat and hatred that goes with that, right? Politician X is going to use AI to destroy everything you love, right? And that's great. Then those become the hottest takes and get the most likes and views and shares and all of that nonsense, right? And, in the search for more and more likes and shares, right? Facts go right out the window. This was part of the issue with Jimmy Kimmel. He jumped out on his show talking about the Charlie Kirk murder and dumped what you would call misinformation, right? Stuff that they knew at the time wasn't true, and he still dropped it. Okay. And, great. That, I guess technically he has a legal right to lie about stuff. But now you get all of this hate and vitriol that comes because of that. And what good comes of hate and vitriol? And the reality is all of this is doing horrible, horrible things to our communities and to us in a lot of ways too, right? Because what we end up happening is or what ends up happening on all of these platforms is there's these pushes for hotter and hotter and hotter takes to get more and more agreements, right? It's again, we're going from I disagree with you to anyone who I disagree with is an enemy and must be destroyed, right? And what does that look like in practice? Okay, you get hit socially, right? Because one, you get dropped in, like, you get canceled, right? Right. That's all cancel culture. But you get shunned, right? Oh, I won't date or be friends with anybody who voted for Trump, or I won't be friends with anyone who voted for Harris, or right. It doesn't matter. But you start seeing those divides. You know, real people don't date insert political party, right? You start driving everyone apart because that's where the hottest takes are. Because what ends up happening is you get the arguments that, you know, if everything's an existential crisis, well, obviously you can't support this political party and be a reasonable human being. And therefore, since you had a sign up for, you know, whichever party, that's just now a sign that I can't be friends with you, right? I can't talk to you. I will now shun you. And that leads to all sorts of fun isolation, right? Which is a problem we'll talk about here in a minute, right? But then you get the economic issues, right? Again, this goes with the canceling, right? You know, Kimmel just got canned. Now, I personally think ABC was right to take action. I don't think the FCC was right to pressure them to take action. But that said, you end up with this whole, all of that whole cancel culture of, hey, they said something I don't like, let's get them fired. And not just get them fired, let's try to get them blacklisted so they can never work again, right? Well, that's just lovely, right? Again, because everything becomes this existential crisis. There's no redemption, right? So if somebody says something truly horrific, all right, and I've heard a lot of really horrific takes on Discord even, of people justifying murder because they didn't like the victim in some way, right? I saw it after the United Healthcare CEO was killed. I heard lots of people saying, oh yeah, oh great, yay, he's dead, hooray, he deserved it, right? Because my claim was denied once, right? Yeah, I saw this a lot, and the conversation went, said, oh yeah, everything would be better if we could just kill a handful of people on the other side of the political divide, right? Oh yeah, oh, it was horrific. There was no, hey, maybe we can be friends, we could talk about it, let's build understanding. Maybe we disagree, but where are you coming from, right? I talked about that on the podcast a while back, right? But we've gone from, hey, I disagree with you, to, hey, there's a problem here, how can we fix it, to, no, we'll just resort to murder, right? Why? Because we're pushing the hottest of hot takes. That, you know, what should be fringe views, which should be is so extreme that nobody wants to just deal with all of that stuff, is becoming magnified because all of this creator media space just, it magnifies it by its very nature. Because yes, we are going to share those hottest of hot takes. And once you start doing that, you start getting that divide, especially because of, hey, threats of violence, because of, oh, hey, you don't support this issue, therefore you deserve all sorts of bad things to happen to you, right? I can't even with you because you support politician X or Y or whatever, right? So what happens is your neighborhoods stop becoming neighborhoods and they start becoming isolated castles, right? And what happens to people in isolation, right? Hey, you know, you're now not talking to your neighbors, you're not talking to members of your community. You're just you in your house. Okay. As an introvert, can't complain about that too much. Of course, I'm isolated in my house with a wife and who I love, so that's not horrible. But community is important, and as all of this, especially for anyone who's perpetually online, you start get this movement away from everyone around you. In part because now you're afraid to talk, right? I'm afraid if I mention the fact that I happen to believe that in low taxes or something, right? Well, now what happens, right? Okay, right? Okay, we're not having arguments over tax policy to that extent, probably, but are you afraid to speak up? Are you afraid to say anything about your beliefs because you're going to get shunned, right? Hey, do you want to build anxiety in society? Make people afraid to talk about themselves. And not in an egotistical way, these are my beliefs. Because who knows, if you're going to say something that might step on a political landmine that you didn't even know was there, right? I used the word blacklisted earlier because that has historically been this term. But you start throwing racial overtones, and now am I a racist because I used the term, right? Oh no, now people are afraid to speak. You build that isolation. Well, humans are social animals to a greater or lesser extent, okay? We like to be around people. Again, to a greater or lesser extent, but we do often need those connections, usually need those connections, at least in a couple of cases, right? So where do we find those connections? Well, we go online, okay? Remember, that was the thing I loved about Twitter when I first got on it, back in 2007, 2008, whatever it was, because I was able to connect with a bunch of people who shared my beliefs. But what's happening? Oh, good. Hey, I find people who share my beliefs, and now we're starting to swim in the sea of hotter and hotter takes, right? It gets... So now we're magnifying that in our own lives. Okay, so what happens to our neighbors, to our neighborhoods, our communities, right? Communities that would come together to help each other, or just be friends, or just be someone you could borrow the proverbial cup of sugar from, right? Neighbors that would help each other out, even if they weren't necessarily friends. It's like, they would occasionally, might have, like, my neighbor will occasionally shovel my walk, and will occasionally shovel theirs, when it snows. It's just neighbors being neighborly, right? But now, right, as when you get this whole stew of hate and vitriol that gets stirred up by these hottest takes being magnified, at best, you get people who ignore each other because they're afraid of stepping on all of those landmines and, getting, mocked, ostracized, quote, canceled, whatever. And at worst, you end up with hatred and violence and stuff, right? I see that I've seen that in my little small town. Someone will put up a yard sign supporting some candidate, and people keep stealing the yard signs, right? Because obviously, having somebody support a candidate you disagree with is, something that you should punish them for, right? Obviously, that's how that works, right? Right? No, of course not. So, but this is what we end up having in our society, and then it bleeds out of social media, right? And this has been a thing in politics for a long time, of politicians who build on the hot takes, right? Politician X just said something. This is the worst thing ever. Donate to my campaign so we can stop them. Politician Y said something else. They're going to strip you of your rights and kill your kittens. We donate to my campaign, right? It's all about that engagement because, right, they want, not honestly, a lot of the case, they just want money or they want power or they want something. But it all builds on itself, right? It's the Ouroboros, right? The snake eating its tail. It's just, it keeps growing because that's what gets engagement. That's what gets views. That's what gets likes, right? So what do we do about it? Now, I would love to say, it'd be really nice. We just shut down all of these systems for a month and just see what happens, right? It's not going to happen. And the reality is that's not practical anyway. So what can you do, first of all? Okay. Now, you could stop using those sites. Or at least just the feed, right? The algorithmic feed, okay? Now, obviously, you would like and subscribe and all of that stuff to my content and get that, right? No, but if you avoid the feed. Now, it's not always practical to stop using, Facebook or X or whatever, okay? My city only puts out announcements on Facebook. I don't use Facebook. I still have a Facebook account because that's how I log into, Facebook and Instagram so that I can publish the shorts that I put out for my channel, for my gaming channel. Okay, fine, but I never go into facebook.com, right? I log into the business site so I can do the business side of things, right? Spam out my clips. But I'm not logging into Facebook to see anything because I don't want to. But that's the only freaking way my city puts out announcements. I mean, I can't even go to their website. They stopped putting out press releases on their own website. Right? It's like, come on, man. I want to know what's going on, but I don't want to use Facebook to do it. Okay, so it's not practical necessarily to totally cut all of that off. Okay. And, X, it's certainly the same way. Sometimes that is the way that cities and stuff are putting out just basic information. Okay. So that leads to the next step. If you can't beat them, okay, I was going to say, if you can't beat them, join them. No, we don't want to join them in the hot takes. Start purging the accounts. When you start seeing those that are those accounts that are pushing the hottest of takes, if you follow them, unfollow them, right? Or mute them, right? I had to mute my own sister on Facebook for that reason, which sucked because I wanted to see her post about her daughter and her family, right? Because she's my sister and I like my sister, right? My sister is cool. But she was posting the hottest of hot takes on politics primarily, and so I had to mute her, and it sucks. And unfortunately, because of the way all of these platforms are built, you can't just follow a person for their kitten pics. You have to, if you follow somebody, you get their cats, but you also get all of their politics or all, right? Or even if it's not necessarily politics, it's just stuff you don't care about, right? Well, they're posting about the NFL. Well, I don't want to watch. I don't watch football. I don't care about their football posts, but I get them anyway, right? So there was several years ago. There was I think it was Japanese, a little Japanese woman. There was a show that she did. I want to say it was on Netflix, about organizing. And she would ask, as they were looking at their huge pile of stuff, does this bring you joy? And if not, They got rid of it. Okay. And you can do the same thing on these creator media sites. If this person isn't bringing you joy, get rid of them, right? Just get them off your list. Now, I'm not saying you need to put on rose-colored glasses, okay? But where's the focus, right? Is it on joy or is it on hate, right? Yes, you might follow your local news, which, again, the long-standing thing with news is if it bleeds, it leads, which, again, the hot takes, right? Because, hey, it turns out newspapers need engagement too. Newspapers, whatever the news site is, okay, the concept of them printing the news on sheets of paper and delivering that to you is a bit archaic, but the principle is the same, right? But that's a start. Now, I have my X account again because I've been on Twitter, started on Twitter years ago. But my Twitter follow list is insane, and it's almost all political people, okay? Because that's why I joined. Now I did meet a couple of other awesome people through Twitter, but it was funny. I met when I got on, I first started following every account I could find that was for people who are in the valley, the mountain valley that I live in. And, talking to a few people just because, hey, what's going on in the valley? It's cool stuff, right? And I ended up living next to one of them. She moved into the apartments behind me. Ah, cool. Okay, that's awesome. And we talk. She's got cute cats. But I've got this massive list. And honestly, if I could, I would love to purge all of my old posts because I was right there with them. I was a political activist. I was part of the problem. Okay? And I would like to just wipe all of that and start over and just be Pearl Stalker, the family-friendly streamer, and not Pearl Stalker, the old political activist. Okay? Sadly, they don't have a delete all button. It kind of sucks. One of these days, I may find a service that'll delete all of my old tweets. But anyway, it sucks. But that's definitely the first step, is start purging those follow lists. Okay. Second or third, maybe, quiet the noise. Right. Find those creators that are measured, or post cat pics. I don't know. But again, that follow that, does this bring you joy mentality? Okay. Of, hey, so I'm a content creator. I follow a bunch of content creators on Twitch and sub to them on YouTube and that type of thing. And it would be nice to be able to get their posts to say, hey, I'm not streaming today, or, because we're moving. Or one creator I follow just got married and posted a couple of pics from his wedding. That's awesome. I love seeing people find joy in life, right? So I used to watch Achievement Hunter on Rooster Teeth, and one of the guys there towards the end who was managing that team was a guy named Trevor Collins. Trevor was kind of fun. Now all of Achievement Hunter, again, they were sort of edgelords or whatever. Anyway, but he was cool. And then I watched a number of other Rooster Teeth things, and I liked listening to a podcast that was hosted by Barbara Dunkelman, who also did the voice of Yang in the RWBY anime series. Okay. And it was fun listening to her podcast. I think it was Always Open was the podcast. Well, it turns out they started dating, and they recently got married. I know because I still follow Barbara on Instagram. But it's great seeing that they found joy in life, right? That's some of the awesome stuff, right, that you can bring in. Are you finding those people who magnify light and joy and are not part of the cacophony of hate, right? That helps, okay? For those platforms that support it, and not all of them do, unfortunately, but for those platforms that support it, start building block lists, right? So if you don't want to hear about politics, right? Well, now you start throwing in the block list of, okay, let's block, again, to use the candidates from the last presidential election here in the US. Oh, let's block everything that mentions Trump or Harris or whatever, right? Hashtags aren't really a thing. I mean, I guess they still exist, but they're more or less useless. So it's harder to block on hashtags, but start building those filters. Okay. And that can help. Heck, I know, guys, I mean, on the Force Center podcast that I used to listen to, one of the hosts of that podcast, of course, is a huge Star Wars fan. That's why he hosts a Star Wars podcast. And he had to block Star Wars on all of his social media because he was dealing with, again, those hottest of hot takes. I've been using politics a lot as in my example, but I've talked in the past about how much I detest fandom these days, because it's not enough that you didn't like Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. No, it had to be the worst thing ever, right? And has completely destroyed Star Wars. Or The Acolyte was horrible. And maybe it was. Maybe you didn't like it. That's cool. You don't have to like things. But now everything is horrible because you didn't like it, right? You can't just talk about how much you like Star Wars without somebody wanting to jump in and talk about how much they hated the sequel trilogy. Or 30 years ago, how much they hated the prequels, right? The Phantom Menace is the worst thing ever, right? Star Wars fans tried to kill Star Wars. I'll tell you, it was bloody in a metaphorical sense, right? But yeah, start filtering things. You can't start putting limits on how long you scroll, right? Now, I think, and I don't know, I think iPhones have the capability, Androids might as well. I haven't looked, but have an option to say, hey, I can only use this app for so many minutes in a day, right? So that, hey, you don't get stuck into doom scrolling, right? And just getting constantly fed those hotter and hotter takes, right? And oh yeah, I fell into that. I still fall into that once in a while on Instagram, because I had a few people I followed that were like web comics, and Instagram was, in one case, I know it's the only way to get the comics, right? As many of them as I can. I try to go, do you have an RSS feed so I can go to your website when you post a new comic, and that type of thing. But there are a couple that I really like that I only see on Instagram. But okay, Instagram, you get the scroll, and I've got a couple of things that I like over there. And yeah, it's easy just to keep going, and now who knows, you end up going off the deep end of weird posts and stuff like that. So yeah, can you set limits? Even if it's just, all right, I'm about to open Instagram, so start timer for 30 minutes, and this is it. When the timer goes off, I'm done. Right? That can help, right? It still doesn't solve the problem of, hey, now is it 30 minutes of those hottest of hot takes? That still might be a problem, right? The other thing, of course, you could turn off notifications, right? The idea is, hey, don't let the apps control you. You control them. Okay. Yeah. Yes, sure. You should turn on notifications for Music Free Gaming or the Music Free Static Podcast, obviously, right? Like and subscribe, people. No, but right. But the idea is, hey, don't let the apps control you. You control them. and, but all of this, again, is just to sort of quiet that noise, sort of minimize that hate. Instead, if you can avoid the algorithmic feed, that's so much the better. Like on YouTube, I never go to youtube.com. Okay. I never just go to the YouTube homepage. Instead, I go straight to my subscribe tab, because that's just all the videos posted by every channel that I subscribe to in a nice chronological list. So I can go through, yeah, that video looks good, I'll watch this one. Nah, I don't feel like watching this one today, or I'll get back to that one, right? As an example, 4 or 5 Minecraft creators that I watch just posted a hide and seek series of videos. The idea is they all build something and then hide in it, and one at a time the other creators come through and try to find them. Okay. And it can be kind of fun. Well, I've watched 4 of the 5. I just haven't gotten around to watching the 5th one yet. Okay. There were just some other things on that I wanted to see. But that's the thing. So I can go watch those, and I'm not fed all of these videos. Yes, I do still have the suggestions that go down the side, but I tend to watch YouTube in their large mode, not full screen, but the slightly bigger. So all of that gets pushed down to the bottom, so I don't see it, or at least don't see it quite as much. And actually, I think YouTube even gives you the option to turn all that off, which is kind of cool. It just doesn't recommend anything to you, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? I still have it up because every once in a while I find something cool, right? So, all right, so there's that options. The last option, I have to admit, I know I'm going long, but this is the last solution that I think is helpful to counteract all of this hate and vitriol that comes from the hottest of takes. And again, I talked about politics a lot because that's where I've been seeing it. That's part of what prompted this. But I've already talked about the issues I had with fandom, right? Because I can't talk Star Wars because I get piled on with all the Star Wars hate by Star Wars, quote unquote, fans, right? But the last thing I would suggest is connect to people. Make real world connections if possible. Now, okay, I'll be the first one to admit, I don't want to talk to other people either a lot of the time. But it's easy to hate people you don't know. It's harder to hate somebody that you have actually accepted as being a person. Because that's what happens with all of this hate and vitriol that gets stirred up is, right, they like the sequels, Star Wars sequels. They're horrible. Why would anybody ever want to like those things? Those people are subhuman, right? It's that otherization occasionally you hear about. They become the other and just hate it, right? But if you get to know somebody as a person, it's like, hey, okay, they liked the early Star Wars, they didn't like the later ones. Cool. They vote this way, I vote another way. Okay, that's fine. But I know that they're actually nice people, right? We can have honest discussions, right? Logical people can look at the same data and come to different conclusions, which is, I think, one of the failings of Star Trek and Spock, which seems to push that logic will only give you one answer. You can logically come to different answers based off of your own experience and knowledge, okay? And that's okay. Getting to know somebody, understanding their perspective. Why did they come to that reason? You still don't have to agree with them, but at least you can have some understanding, okay? And yes, you can find those connections online, but find them in places that don't fan the flames, right? There are great Discord communities that you can be in to talk about awesome things that aren't hate and vitriol and stuff, okay? You know, obviously I could push my own channels, but find those places where they have a positive take on fandom, for example, right? That don't dive into this person has a different view, they are obviously a horrible, horrible person who should be destroyed. Okay. They should be shunned from society because they liked whatever. Okay. And that can be hard. And taking the step to step out of those communities. Okay. When you find them, I have a hard time. One of the communities I've like for one reason is Zach Bussey's Discord. Now, Zach Bussey, if you don't know, he does a lot of discussion of what's happening in the content creator space, focused mainly on streaming. So Twitch, Kick, YouTube. Okay. A little bit less on the YouTube video space, but mostly in the streaming side of the house, which is fine. But man, Zach will fall into the hottest of hot takes a few times. He's got a couple of hobby horses that he just rides, and that gets rough. But there are a number of people in his communities that also are in that hottest of hot takes, some of them politically, right? I talked about some of those people who were advocating for murder, and that it was in his community that I was seeing that. And honestly, I've started looking for other places, right? Because while Zach's newsletter is awesome, his community is not so much. And so I've been looking for alternatives to find the news that I want as a content creator without all of that nonsense. And yeah, I've started ignoring people in that community because it's just so bad at times. But because I'm trying to follow my own advice here, you know, when I can. Use the mute button, use the block button if you have to. Right? But quiet that stuff down so you can just focus on joy and understanding and those things that make humanity awesome. Even if you're occasionally talking about things that are maybe not as great, like, you know, I don't know, The Acolyte, Star Wars The Acolyte. Pick something. Okay, so I think that would help. Now, there are some other suggestions I could think of on the provider's side. I don't think this is really the time or the place to go into it since I'm already going very long. But it's something that I think for all of us, we can control what we can control. And the more that we actually take control of our feed, I think the better off we are as a community. And honestly, I think more often than not, we need to ignore those hottest of hot takes. Okay? Because they're driving us apart, and it's not great, man. It is driving apart communities, whether it's your neighborhood or said fandom, right? It's just making things suck. So if you have other tips, other things, let me know. Drop them in the comments. Because I need engagement too, darn it. No, but I honestly want to know. And until next time, be excellent to each other. And this is Music Free Static signing off.